There we go. I see a few participants still popping on, so we'll wait a few moments as they enter into the chat. Welcome in if you're just joining us. We're going to give it just about a minute or two for everybody else to pop on. We need some background music.
Hmm.
All right, I see a few more trickling in, but we're just a minute past, so we will get our webinar started. So welcome all. Thanks for joining us. You are on our Supporting All Students Legal Perspective and Practical Steps for Immigration Policy in Oklahoma Schools. This is presented by Oklahoma Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. And those who are new to our name, we're a public interest law center and a 501c3 nonprofit organization that fights for justice and opportunity for all Oklahomans. We approach big issues like criminal justice, juvenile justice, education, and election justice by tackling their root causes. We take our work wherever we believe we can do the most good. Sometimes that takes us to the courthouse. Oftentimes it takes us to the Capitol. And our favorite is when it takes us into the community where we get to do things like this. We keep our mission statement simple, and it's we fight for the rights of all Oklahomans. And webinars like this help us to gauge our concerns from our community and provide some upfront perspectives and practical steps from active experts in the field, like our panelists today. My name is Shelby Bomford. I'm the Education Justice Organizer at Oklahoma Appleseed, and I'll be moderating with us today. So our goal for our webinar is to leave you a little bit more informed about the proposed immigration policy in our schools, how this ties into possible federal agendas, and what our school districts and our school boards are doing to stay vigilant on some of these things. More specifically, some background on what's happening is there's been a lot of talk about immigration in schools the past few weeks, as hopefully a lot of us on the call are aware of, and that's where we're here to learn more about. And leaders have gone as far as to suggest that there's ICE raids within schools or in safe places and removing students who are undocumented. So our state superintendent, Ryan Walters, has promulgated a rule around the OSDE, or Oklahoma State Department of Education, that would require schools to screen families for documentation of the immigration statuses. This rule, of course, violates current Supreme Court precedent, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today, which says that all students in America have the right to be educated regardless of their immigration status. So we, as we do in our community, we gathered our legal professionals, a savvy school board member, and our policy expert to discuss the implications of this proposed policy and what members of our community can expect or even what they can do to act and help advocate. Each of these panelists is uniquely positioned to discuss the multiple facets of this policy and what would happen if it is passed through legislation this session. We also want to allow time at the end. So we'll allow about 10-15 minutes for Q&A, although we do have our chat feature disabled for this. Colleen McCarty, she's our executive director of Oklahoma Appleseed. She'll be monitoring the Q&A. So feel free to our participants to type in at any time. She may answer it via message, which then will be open up to everybody who is on this call, or it may be popped up to one of our panelists who may answer it live time. If it's not answered in either one of those ways, it'll likely be answered at the end of the call in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So we definitely encourage you to engage in that Q&A, just knowing that that chat is not available. Another reminder, we've scheduled out an hour and 15 minutes for this, so we're predicting a scheduled end time of 8:15, and then this will be recorded and it's going to be available on our Oklahoma Appleseed website later. So we're going to start introducing our panelists. Up first, Lorena, would you like to kick us off?
Sure thing. So my name is Lorena Rivas, and I am the CEO owner of Rivas and Associates. I'm also an attorney, an immigration attorney. We're an immigration law firm who our mission is to empower immigrants and help them build their futures here in the United States. We represent foreign nationals that are either here in the United States or wanting to migrate into the United States, immigrate to the United States. And we represent them in their family-based petitions and their humanitarian-based petitions or in their deportation defense proceedings. We mostly serve Spanish-speaking immigrants. However, obviously we want to help every immigrant gain status here in the United States and be protected. I'm a native Oklahoman, originally from Northwest Oklahoma. I love my Oklahoma community. We have an office here in Tulsa and an office in Oklahoma City, but we serve individuals all over the United States. You're muted.
Shelby, you're muted.
I would say that's awesome, and I heard that you're working on a new initiative, and maybe we get to talk about it a little bit later. Yeah.
So yes, yeah.
Awesome. Tony.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, for having us this evening. My name is Tony Childers, and I have the privilege of being General Counsel for Oklahoma City Public Schools, meaning that I'm responsible for all of the fun legal things that come along with education law, which as an attorney is actually a pretty good area of the law to practice in. And I've been practicing in education law for the past 12 years. In my background, I first served as a litigation attorney representing schools across Oklahoma, later transitioned to a nonprofit school board association where I worked to help develop policies and work with schools in dealing with these types of complex issues. And now, as I said, I'm with Oklahoma City Public Schools. And again, I just wanted to say thank you for giving us this opportunity to have such an important conversation. This is an issue that is affecting Oklahoma in a particular way, but it really is affecting schools across the United States. And schools have the same types of questions or dealing with the same types of questions of how do we deal with these situations? And just having the opportunity to discuss this with the other panelists and hearing other points of views is excellent. So thank you for that. I'm also a native Oklahoman from North Central Oklahoma. I'm glad to be here and look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. And then talking about different points of view, I'll pass it off to Tulsa Public School, Stacey.
Hi, my name is Stacey Woolley, and I am the board president at Tulsa Public Schools. I am a mom first of 5 kids, and I did not sign up for what has actually transpired over the time serving in my position. It's been very interesting to say the least. I have been on the school board since just a year before COVID came to town. And so we can all imagine my expectations versus what the reality has been. This conversation is incredibly important to me because one of the reasons I even became interested in serving on the school board is because I believe that education is the platform through which everyone has an opportunity to achieve what we call the American dream. And I think that that is critical, particularly to families who have historically been underserved or otherwise not achieved in the same ways that some parts of our communities have been able to. So this is very near and dear to my heart. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
We look forward to you being a part of it. You've helped Oklahoma Appleseed out with your perspective of being on the school board a whole lot. So we appreciate you. And then our very own David.
Thank you. I guess I get to be the token immigrant on tonight's panel. I'm a native of Montreal and Edmonton, Canada, but I've been in Oklahoma for close to 30 years now, and I've been with Appleseed as the Director of Research and Strategic Impact for a year and a half, and much of my work while at Appleseed has been on a number of education issues. Prior to joining Appleseed, I taught public policy at the University of Oklahoma, Tulsa MPA program, where I taught classes on a bunch of subjects, including a semester on immigration policy. Prior to that, I was executive director of Oklahoma Policy Institute for the better part of a decade. and also worked at Community Action Project and at the Oklahoma State Senate. While I was at CAP in the mid-2000s, that was the time of House Bill 1804, the first wave of state efforts to get engaged on immigration policy, and I was very much involved in efforts to try to both explain what was behind Oklahoma's immigration law and also to defeat it. So this is deja vu all over again for me.
I hope that's kind of a good thing. We've done it once, we can do it again. Thank you, David. And to all four of you, without hesitation, when we reached out, the answer was yes. And so we give you a huge thank you for just showing up here tonight with us. And with that, we'll roll right into it. So I'll address each panelist individually. Each of them have individual questions. Time permitting, we'll ask general questions for anybody to answer, even if multiple panelists answer the same question. And then we definitely want to save the final 10 to 15 minutes for Q&As as much as we have in there. Another reminder, put the Q&As as soon as you have them, even if we don't get to them until the end. If something just jogs your memory, pop it in as soon as you know. So, David, we'll start with your first question. Can you start off by giving us the background regarding the rights of all children to enjoy equal access to public education? What is the current legal situation? How did we get here? And what kind of threats are you seeing, not just in Oklahoma, but in other states?
Geez, who wrote that question? Oh no, that was so the right to equal access to education was guaranteed by the U.S. Supreme Court in a landmark 1982 case that was called Plyler versus Plyler versus Doe, that was decided by a 5-4 majority. In Plyler, parents of undocumented children challenged a Texas law that barred access to free public K-12 education for undocumented children. And I think it's worth quoting the Supreme Court decision in Plyler, at least some of the passages. The court noted that denying undocumented children access to public education would visit a lifetime hardship on a discrete class of children that would subject them to the stigma of illiteracy that will mark them for the rest of their lives, and that it would deny them the ability to live within the structure of our civic institutions and foreclose any realistic possibility that they will contribute in even the smallest way to the progress of our nation. So based on that logic and the 14th Amendment, they struck down the Texas law. And since 1982, the principle that all children have the equal right to an education has been the law of the land across the country. In 2011, Alabama passed an immigration law called House Bill 56, the Alabama Taxpayer and Citizen Protection Act, that included a provision that was Section 28 of the law that required school administrators to determine the immigration status of all newly enrolling students and to submit an annual report to the State Board of Education with all the data they obtained. So that law was challenged by the federal government, by the National Immigration Law Center and others, and the law was enjoined by federal courts. The courts determined that Section 28, the mandated disclosure of a student's immigration status, imposed obstacles to the ability of an undocumented child to obtain an education because it would understandably deter this population from enrolling in and attending school. In fact, the immediate aftermath of House Bill 56 implementation, Hispanic student absence rates tripled, and over 13% of Alabama's Hispanic school children withdrew from school, according to data from the U.S. Department of Justice and Education. Under both the Obama and Biden administrations, the Department of Justice and Department of Education issued guidance to states stating that, quote, districts may not request information with the purpose or result of denying access to public schools on the basis of race, color, or national origin. So the law is pretty clear cut, and the situation has been pretty quiet for over a decade. But last year, the Heritage Foundation put out a brief suggesting that maybe now that we have a Supreme Court that has shown itself quite willing to go back and revisit long established and well set precedents, maybe the Supreme Court, it was time for the Supreme Court to revisit Plyler v. Doe. So Ryan Walters heard about this and decided to jump all over it and began obsessing about the immigration issue beginning this summer. Among other things, he put out a memo claiming that illegal immigration was costing the state of Oklahoma $460 million a year, and even sent a bill to the Biden administration 3 days before they left office. I don't think that they received a check. More significantly for our purposes, the Walters administration has proposed an administrative rule alluded to in Shelby's introductory comments that would require parents or legal guardians to provide proof of U.S. citizenship or legal immigration status at the time of student enrollment. School districts would be required to record and report the number of students for which parents or legal guardians are unable to establish citizenship or legal immigration status to the Oklahoma State Department of Education. So that rule was proposed in December. There was a public comment period where they received 700 written comments that we believe almost without exception were negative or opposed. There was a public hearing where 20 speakers all got up and spoke objecting to the rule. Nonetheless, the rule passed the State Board of Education in late January on a 5-0 vote. Since then, much to our encouragement and somewhat to our surprise, Governor Stitt has come out in opposition to the rule, saying, quote, "In Oklahoma, our Constitution says we're going to educate all kids, and I want to make sure every kid feels safe and is being educated in the state of Oklahoma. To use our kids as political pawns is unbelievable to me." He also said, "I'm going to do what I can to change that, collecting 6, 7, 8-year-old kids' addresses and immigration statutes in the state of Oklahoma. That's not a public safety issue." So right now, the rule has passed the State Board of Education. It needs to go to the legislature. It would need to be approved by the legislature and signed by Governor Stitt to take effect in law. And we're hopeful, given the governor's statements and also similar statements from Senate President Pro Tem Lonnie Paxton, that won't happen. OK Appleseed put together a sign-on letter that we released last week, supported by 29 organizations calling on the legislature to disapprove the rule. Even if Oklahoma does not pass a rule, that would be a challenge to Plyler v. Doe. Other states, however, are looking at this, in particular Texas and Tennessee. Tennessee Republican lawmakers have introduced a bill that would allow school districts to deny undocumented students from enrolling in school that was sponsored by their House majority leader. And in Texas, there's legislation that proposes amending the Texas Education Code to prohibit admitting students who are unlawfully present in the United States to public schools and pre-K programs free of charge unless the federal government agrees to pay the state for the cost of educating such students. So Oklahoma is not alone in facing these challenges. We are working very closely with national and state partners to try to fight back these challenges wherever they are appearing. So thank you for the question, and I will turn it back to you.
Thank you for that. That absolutely lays the groundwork of where we're at, where we may be going, and definitely where we're going in this conversation. Tony, I'm going to pass it on to you when you're ready. So your question, now that we have a better idea of Plyler v. Doe and the status, and how it's going to affect schools. You're general counsel at Oklahoma City Public Schools. So what advice are you giving to your district on and other school leaders regarding what to do if immigration officers do show up to your school?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. And I'll start by saying, David, thank you for laying that groundwork, because that's really essential to have that background to understand some of the response that schools are having. And first, I would also point out, and as David did say, but because there's been confusion about this, the rule that was suggested and passed by the State Board of Education is not the law, still has to go before the legislature. Oklahoma did change the process for that 3 to 4 years ago, where the legislature could do nothing on the rule and it would pass to the governor. But based on the statements that David pointed out, that's just questionable of what would actually happen at that point, because the governor has not shown support for the rule. But as to the response for schools, like I said, it starts with that legal foundation. And one, Plyler v. Doe, that schools, we are here and we are required by the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution to provide a public education to students regardless of their immigration status. So as we would for any other student, the first thing is our doors are open for students who come to be enrolled at our school. Schools across Oklahoma are not asking for this information. They are not making requests for immigration status. And a big part of that is because of Plyler. Not only that, but for the past several decades, the guidance that we've received from the Federal Department of Education has always been that schools should not collect that information. That requesting that information does potentially violate Plyler. It also potentially violates some other statutes, Title IV and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And because of that, schools have always been told not to collect that information. So schools have had some confusion with the rule and how to actually respond to that. But as to if you have an official coming to your school, we're looking at Plyler, but we're also looking at something called FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which says that schools, just as you do for HIPAA in a medical setting or any other type setting where you have a particular protection, schools protect student records. So when it comes to student data, whether that be grades, addresses, phone numbers, immigration status. The government and courts have been clear that information on immigration status kept in a student record would qualify as being student information that is protected under FERPA. So that information, schools are required to keep private unless there's some exception. And there is no exception under FERPA that generally allows law enforcement, just by the nature of being a law enforcement officer or a government official, to have access to that information. Access to that information require either a appropriately legal and signed subpoena or warrant that would otherwise require the school district to produce that information, or some kind of emergency circumstances where a student's life or the life of another, that there's some threat to them that would allow the school to release information. Outside of that, schools are prohibited from releasing information. So with that background, I would say that the legal obligations that schools have under FERPA and under Plyler really shapes our response. And that response really isn't any different than what schools would encounter for any other law enforcement officer that comes to their doors. Whether it be a local police officer inquiring about an investigation, the FBI trying to get information about a family's home address, or in this case, an immigration official, the response is still the same in terms of we are required by law to keep information private. We cannot release that information unless there is some particular exception in the law. And there is not a particular exception that allows the release of student information just because it's been requested. Now, if someone were to come to the office with documentation, make that request, our training and what we're telling our schools is do what you normally would do. You can receive that information, you treat the officer with respect, acknowledge that the information that they're seeking, and then refer it to the general counsel's office so that we can review any information, any kind of documentation that they might have. We can review what their request is, and then help guide them in what response would be necessary. So really, it's going back to that legal foundation that the obligation that schools have really is guided by the law. And unless there's some exception, a warrant or a subpoena that would otherwise require that production, schools aren't providing that information because they can't provide that information. And then guiding this kind of back to the conversation on the rule that's been proposed as well, that same standard really is applying to schools, that if the state is asking for data collection on immigration status, there's those same concerns about, is this going to be a violation of Title IV? Is this going to be a violation of Title VI? And then is this going to be a violation of Plyler versus Doe? And we've seen at least one circuit court, as David said, they've said those kinds of disparate impacts on a community where it discourages attendance would fall under Plyler just as much as a school saying you can't attend because of your immigration status. So there are a couple of questions about how that rule would be affected based on the wording that's there. But right now across Oklahoma, there's been no change in the data that's being collected. At Oklahoma City Public Schools, there's been no change, and there's no change in how we handle the situation if law enforcement comes to the front office seeking information. And then finally, I would just also say, because there's some information sometimes that gets people worried and concerned. From my standpoint, I'm not aware of any request, whether it be in Oklahoma City Public Schools or any public school in Oklahoma, from the information that I have, where ICE officials have shown up at the school, coming to the front office to request information on a student. We know that sensitive policy or sensitive locations policy was withdrawn by the new administration. We've not actually seen enforcement from the school side of things, where we've had immigration or ICE officials come to our front door seeking student information.
That is a great piece of follow-up information, because I was going to ask you that if you have had any encounter with DHS or ICE regarding this. So
we have not, and like I said, I have not heard of any reports in Oklahoma, or even in the communications that I have with other attorneys in associations that I belong to across the United States. I have not heard of that. There was a report of of a group showing up at Chicago Public Schools. That was not immigration. That was not ICE, to be clear. That was a different incident. So again, we are not aware of that actually happening in our schools, though we do know that sensitive location policy has been withdrawn.
thank you for that. That's a great perspective on how you are interfacing with your district and school officials. So I'm going to pass it to Stacey in Tulsa, from Oklahoma City to Tulsa. And my question for you is more family facing. So with a large population of students who are first or second generation immigrants, what approach is your district taking to reassure the families, and I would even say the students, that Tulsa schools remain a safe and welcoming place?
Thank you for the question. And I would just like to reiterate everything that we just heard from Tony, because those things really do matter. And I am a board member on the executive board of the Council of Great City Schools, in addition to being on Tulsa Public Schools board. Council of Great City Schools is 71, I believe, of the largest schools in the country. And I have not heard any reports so far from any of those places about ICE trying to enter schools or anything along those lines. So that being said, I want to admit right off the top that this is a very big challenge for any school district who has to try to convey this message to our families. It has always been particularly challenging for any family who has someone who might not be documented in their family to feel comfortable coming into many spaces, because the history of the world is that we other people, right? And so we have worked very hard as a district to try and build relationships with families who might or might not be documented, and to make sure that our immigrant families feel like they are valued and should be in our schools on a regular basis, contributing to their kids' education. There are many things that are cultural differences that also are part of that conversation, but it's hard. And we worked really hard, and we really felt as a district that we were making great um, gains in that area of talking with families and getting families involved. And this just served as such a major chiller because people are more afraid than they have been during my time on the board, because this hasn't been a big conversation in the last decade, as David spoke to earlier. So we are trying to send messages out through organizations that are very involved with the immigrant communities, but it really is a challenge. It's very challenging. And we immediately saw that our attendance went down in January amongst students who spoke a second language, like immediately after the holidays and just prior to the new administration taking office, and then even more so once they did. Our attendance dropped significantly, and we actually had right off the bat almost 200 students who we thought withdrew. I don't know what the latest number is from that, because most of them obviously didn't want to share where they were going. If part of their concern was being deported, right? So I I will say that we're working hard. I'm not sure we're working hard enough. And I'm not sure that we have figured out the best way to ensure our families that they're safe.
I'm sure through this conversation and just education and experts being together, we might have a little bit of clarity on that. So thank you
Yeah.
for your work with that.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah. Lorena, so as an immigration attorney, right, you interface with the demographic that we're speaking of on a daily basis. So we want to know from you if there's concerns that you're hearing from your community. And we talked a little bit about fear within public schools, but fears that your community has, especially related to having children in school. And secondarily, what is your advice to families with children or even the parents who happen to be undocumented and their attendance, kind of what Stacey spoke on as well?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as President Trump entered office on January 20th, there was a flurry of executive orders. And so that immediately set off the panic in our community, the immigrant community. And I, as a representative that represents these clients and their proceedings, their legal proceedings, or just a member of the community, was receiving a multitude of phone calls. So the chilling effect, the fear mongering of these executive orders was effective. And it's, sadly, it was just echoed with the fear mongering that has occurred here in the state of Oklahoma as well. So definitely my clients have been fearful, and not only just fearful for themselves, but for their children, unfortunately, as well, being able to attend a school here in the state of Oklahoma. So it's been a lot of, I've spent a lot of time since January 20th just trying to clarify any misinformation that's out there, and clarify to them as well the objective of all these executive orders and all of these directives, that it's a lot of it is just to create that fear so people just auto deport themselves, self deport themselves, and leave the country, and or don't take benefit of the rights that they have, including their children going to school. So it's been a lot of just trying to clarify them. I do daily lives, Facebook lives, and I appear on radios just to clarify this misinformation that's not just in rumored around and talked about amongst themselves, but also just found in social media. And Stacey was very right about it. Whenever this, the secure places policy was lifted, as well as this, the policy was passed by the state board about checking immigration statuses, my questions became, number one is, should I be sending my children to school? Should I just withdraw from them? What's going to happen if my child is detained? Well, they're going to be arrested there. Will I get arrested when I go pick up my children from school? So it was about clarifying to them, and again, empowering them. And that's the problem that my clients have so many times, is their lack of ability to speak the English language, perhaps their lower educational status, and their reading ability. Just they're so fearful of anything happening regarding this. And so they are easily swayed or to maybe just give up on their options or giving up on their rights that they had, because undocumented people do still have rights, even though you may not have a lawful status here. So that's been the primary. And of course, in my community, I've seen not necessarily a large increase of individuals being arrested and deported. I honestly, it's not too much more compared to any previous administration. Deportations always occurred with any presidential term, including President Biden. Definitely there was deportations happening there. But the difference between the Trump administration is they're publicizing it and celebrating deportations and this fear that they're creating of not being able to protect or provide immigration relief. So it's more amplified and more in their face, which causes this fear. So first of all, I spend a lot of time as well clarifying things, but reminding my clients that there is still ways to become legal in the United States. There's still ways that you can be protected here and be unified with your family. There's still ways to fight your deportation and to ask for release from detention facilities. But I do constantly tell my clients, even though the grand majority of people will not be affected by these policies, and despite the objective of deporting millions of individuals from this country, it's just feasibly not possible by any administration. And as well, it would collapse the economy of the United States. So it's not going to happen. And as a result, though, you still need to go ahead and live your life and continue sending your kids to school and not create more fear amongst them. But it is wise to have some preparations, some emergency preparations in case someone is detained, like knowing an emergency contact, talking to an immigration attorney prior to anything happening, and having a number of a trusty individual if you do have to access funds, or that has to pick up your children from school if something were to happen like that. So preparations are key, but a lot of them have been preparing for this happening since they've been here in the United States. They come here to work. So they're saving money in case something were to happen. But they are valued members of the community. They are parents. They have children here. They're neighbors. They're business owners. So again, it's so important that their stories are told to make you realize that this person that is wanting to be deported, or this child who's wanting to be pointed out as not having status, is a real member of our community and a contributing member of community.
That's so comforting. The last half of that was the advice to families, and I think you put it perfectly in a way that will take that fear and compartmentalize it and just maybe have a moment of calm amongst all of it. So we appreciate your approach to that. Thank you for that. We have 2 more questions left, and I'm going to open it up to all of our panelists. If you would like to popcorn off or make it a discussion, it doesn't have to be one panelist to answer just one question. But I did also want to let the participants know that we are going to move to Q&A here coming up soon. So if you want to give a little bit more thought to some questions, type it in the chat as we go. So this one is for David and or Tony specifically. And it's this week that we learned that Ryan Walters has asked for an attorney general's opinion as to whether a recent executive order from the Trump administration aimed at preventing illegal immigrants from accessing public benefits would affect programs run by local school districts such as Title I or school meals. Is there any other issue to be worried about?
So I will take the first stab at that, and then Tony may be able to add. So this executive order from the Trump administration was specifically calling on government departments to ensure that undocumented immigrants were not accessing public benefits. And public benefits is very much a term of art in federal law. It goes back to the Welfare Reform Act that was passed in 1996, which limited the ability of many immigrants to access public benefits. And there is a long-standing definition of what a public benefit is and what it is not. And the good news is that benefits provided by school, whether it is education itself or Title I or child nutrition programs, such as a school meal program, are not public benefits. And if Ryan Walters, or if he has any attorneys left in his office this week, had done a Google search, he would have been able to easily find out that the school lunch program is not a public benefit within the definition of federal law, and that schools can continue to provide all the programs and services that they are currently providing. Now, that's my answer to it. Do I have 100% confidence that our Attorney General, who's running for governor, will rule or will issue an opinion in line with that? I don't have 100% confidence in it, but I do think that if, once the Attorney General starts looking at what the definition of a public benefit is, that he will happily or unhappily come to the conclusion that none of the programs that Ryan Walters is asking about count as public benefits, and that schools will not be required to stop offering any programs that they're currently offering to all students, regardless of their lawful status. Tony, do you want to add?
Can I
Yeah.
ask something real quick? I'm sorry. Can you
Yeah.
clarify, David, what does qualify under that definition? Just a few examples so people
So
understand that.
there's a list of about 30 programs that was published in the Federal Register in the late 1990s. Most prominently, temporary assistance for needy families, Medicaid, with the exception of emergency Medicaid, SNAP benefits, Medicare, Social Security. Those are all public benefits. Child nutrition programs are not. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and thanks for that, David. And I would echo really the same thing. And first of all, I'd also point out that, remember, these executive orders that are coming from the US president, those are directed at federal agencies. Those are not directed at state agencies. They're not directed at states. They're not directed at any other executive other than the executive branch of the federal government. And if you read through it, that's really what it says. It says those executive agencies, those federal executive agencies, that they are asking them to take steps when it comes to the use of these funds. It is not directing the OSDE, the Oklahoma State Department of Ed, to do anything. It's not directing public schools to do anything. And public schools don't collect information on immigration status. So making a decision of who would get benefits and who wouldn't would be quite difficult because there's not even a way to differentiate that. Is there a concern? Sure, there's a concern because federal funding makes up about 10 to 12% for most school districts in the United States, in Oklahoma, makes up about 10 to 12% of their budget, which is significant. When you look at funding in Oklahoma for public schools, any cut is significant. So there's that concern, particularly when it's affecting things like child nutrition and Title I funding, which typically goes to those schools that are highest need schools. But the hope is that, first of all, the Attorney General's opinion is that it's an opinion. And it's not necessarily binding on, it's not binding on the courts at all. It's an opinion that can be overturned. It's not something that necessarily applies to private individuals. There is some effect when it comes to state entities, but that's I think we have a couple steps before it gets there. And I would say with David's analysis of what constitutes or does not constitute a public benefit should be pretty reassuring when looking at how that question can be answered. But then again, you just don't know. You get different answers from different attorney generals on various topics. And until we get a response, we don't really know how to act. But as of right now, again, no change for our schools. We're doing what we've always done, which is to educate kids, regardless of their immigration status, do what's best, what we think for our kids here in Oklahoma, and to continue to do that.
We love that. That's why we're here. I have one more question for all panelists before we move into the Q&A, and thank you for those who are answering it. I see it's popping off down there. So the question for everybody is, what more do you think can be done? And I know that is a loaded question. So what more do you think that can be done by schools, by elected officials, by law enforcement, by any others that you can think of to ensure that schools are safe and welcoming places. And I would also add to that, is there anything that us as advocates can do to ease fears or to continue to advocate? Don't all come off of mute at once. All right, Stacey.
Okay, it's super challenging. It's a super challenging question, right? And you mentioned that it's loaded, and I think we are at a place in time where we kind of feel overwhelmed just by what's going on in the world, right? I would say that the things that we can do to help ensure that schools continue to be safe and welcoming is, honestly, share that sentiment. Talk to people. We have to be out in our communities, making sure that families of all sorts recognize that we value them. Right now, we have an attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And we have to have a conversation about what it means to value diversity, what it means to value equity and inclusion. That ADA is part of that, right? We have elevators in our schools in order to be equitable and inclusive. These are not bad things. So we have to be willing to go out and have conversations and stand arm in arm with our neighbors. And honestly, just to be more vocal. We have too many people in positions of power, in positions of privilege, who are quite frankly afraid to speak up. And I get it, but at the same time, I don't. So at the end of the day, how do we ensure that schools remain safe? We have these conversations again and again and again, and we say it's not okay to attack students. It's never okay to attack students. I don't care who the student is, where they're from, who they love, none of those things. There are children, and if we are not treating them fairly, if we are not offering them the opportunity to have a solid education, we are doing nothing that is beneficial for the future of our country. Every single child needs to be successful if we want to have a country that is successful. It's not a pie. It's not a pie. We can all be successful together. And the more every single child is successful, the more successful we'll be as a society.
So I would just add one thing that people can do and maybe one thing not to do. So the not to do is not to spread misinformation, um, even obviously accidentally, but certainly in the first few days under the new administration, there were all kinds of Facebook posts going around from people in Oklahoma about ICE raids that were not substantiated and turned out not to be true. So, before you do anything that can help spread and increase fear, just be really careful and make sure that, if there are ICE agents in a neighborhood, and there's a picture that shows where it was and when it's taken, maybe that needs to be spread. Otherwise, let it go. Maybe the thing to do, I don't know if everyone can see all the questions, but Wendy posed a question or had a comment regarding the great work that TPS and Oklahoma City Public Schools have done, and TPS in particular. The superintendent put out a message in a video with translation from a bilingual staff person. If the message isn't coming out from your school district, if your superintendent or your board isn't putting out the message, then maybe you can reach out to them and encourage them to do the same. Make sure that at the local level, parents and children are hearing that they are still welcome in school, that they will not be asked about their immigration status, that ICE agents are not, in the schools. So I don't know that we have all the school districts in Oklahoma that have been as vocal on this as some of the larger ones, but that's something that you can perhaps encourage your local leaders to do.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I'm a proud product of public education, and I grew up as a little brown girl in a very white school, and never did I feel like I was something that I didn't belong there. And so that sentiment of wanting to educate any child that walks through the door and educate them well, and because that is your job, it just needs to be really resonating amongst our teachers and our school leaders. And I think for the grand majority, it does resonate. They know when they wanted to become a teacher, it's because they wanted to really help children, and they didn't want to be checking their status, and it wasn't to discriminate against them because of their national origin or because of their color of their skin. And I need our school officials to make sure to really vibrate that message out more. And again, I think that is very much embodied in the mission of any teacher or school official. But at the same time, I hear stories of some that are not. Just like the anti-immigrant sentiment has individuals have been emblazoned and fiery about speaking about their anti-immigration and beliefs. Just likewise, we need our school officials, our school leaders, and our community members and community leaders as well to speak up against it too. If one side gets loud, then we need the other side to get loud too as well. And so that's what I would ask as a member of this community, as a public school product who really thrived and have grown up all thanks to the teachers I had, that we need to go back to that, the importance of really helping children become empowered and grow.
David, I saw you had your hand up. Was that a clap or did you have something next?
That was like that was the Zoom equivalent of the butt call.
Oh, I gotcha. Tony, would you like to chime in here, or are you ready to move on to some Q&A?
I know, I think everything's been covered, but I do say it is important to get that message out because people are fearful, students are fearful, and families are fearful. So to the extent that schools can just reassure that we are here to educate kids, we are not here to be immigration officials, we are not here to make decisions on immigration status, we are here for reading, writing, arithmetic, and to support you as we can. I think that's great for the community. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll move into Q&A, and there's two here that are kudos. So I want to start on a moment of positivity. Catherine says, I 100% agree that our public school leaders need to stand together with one united voice and speak out, as both Oklahoma City Public Schools and TPS has. And she also wrote that she wanted to thank both of you and your districts for making public statements that you will, in capital, not request in capital any citizenship information from students or their families, and that all are welcome to free and equitable education. I think that's just a good moment of pause and appreciation. So we'll open up to anybody. I think just for time and we have 7 questions and just about 20 minutes to conclude. So we'll keep our answers brief, but as informative as possible. Kevin asked, has Walters included any reference to FERPA in his public statements to the proposed admin rule and the other legal basis for prohibiting actions that the rule describes?
I'll answer that first. Not that I've seen. I haven't seen any discussion from a FERPA perspective or privacy perspective from the State Department of Ed or State Board of Ed. The concerns for FERPA really arise more when you have someone that's an outside agency coming to request information. Now, FERPA, as it applies to the State Department of Education requesting information, there are exceptions where the State Department of Education can get information on students. But I would also say, if you look at the rule as it's written right now, schools, the reporting as the rule's written, the reporting is not of individual names to the State Department of Ed. If that information were to be collected, which again, it is not being collected, but the way the rule is written is that the number would be collected and a number would be reported to the State Department, not individual names, not an association with student information. But I have not seen any reference from the State Department or the Superintendent Ryan Walters with regard to FERPA. And then I'll go ahead and talk really briefly on the next question about newly arrived Afghans who may not have documentation. You know, it's interesting. I think the rule could have been worded much more clearly and less confusingly, because it creates some other legal questions in terms of some of the wording in the rule. But the rule does say that other things can be collected, and I pulled that up. Not just birth certificates. They're asking, or schools could also collect passports, state ID information, resident status cards, that sort of information could be collected. So there are other things within the rule itself. So we would wait to see how that might impact any collection if schools are collecting that information. But there are alternatives built into the rule as it's currently written.
Thank you. You're one step ahead. And just for the recording purposes who may not be able to read, the question that Tony just answered was specifically around newly arrived Afghans that don't have birth certificates or any other forms of ID that suffice for enrollment. Are there any other federal IDs that reveal immigration status? Oh, there's no other, so that is worrisome. That was the question. The next question is, are there any issues with teachers giving out Know Your Rights cards or red cards at school? And there's a link here as well if you want more information for whoever wants to answer that.
I don't mind going again if no one else wants to chime in, but so I would say that's going to depend on your school district, and it's going to depend on their policy for material distribution and information to be distributed, whether it's within or it's outside of curriculum. For example, here at Oklahoma City Schools, we have a website where we link information for families in terms of the messaging that we've already sent out to families. We provide them with some information as to community partners that we know are equipped. The issue that I would say to be careful of is I'm not familiar with the red card. I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar with it. But information you find online in the area of immigration, Ms. Rivas can talk about this, but it's something that is not every attorney even understands it. It can be a complicated area. So in terms of getting information online and distributing that, I would be careful, because you want to be sure, going back to what David was saying earlier, that we're putting out information that we know is accurate. And if there's information that someone is seeking related to their immigration status, generally they should be encouraged to talk to someone who has that specialization, someone that can look at their particular circumstances and give them the information they need.
Does anybody else have an opinion on that or more familiar with the red card?
I was just going to expand on that. So the red card is very much know your rights, like the right to remain silent, the right to not let somebody enter into your house, just, if they say they're ICE agents. So they're very general rights that anybody has against if law enforcement stops them or try to enter their homes or question them. But the link that was mentioned there, it's an ILRC link from the Immigrant Legal Rights Legal Resource Center, which is a legitimate and very trustworthy source for immigrants, even my attorneys as well. I use that site a lot. So that is a good, legitimate red card with good information about your rights as an immigrant here.
Can I jump in about this question?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, everybody. I know I'm off camera, but I did just want to say about giving out the cards. In this specific administration in the state of Oklahoma, we have seen a lot of retaliatory actions towards teachers. I'm sure that won't shock anybody on this Zoom webinar. We have seen teachers who have posted QR codes to books that may not be available in their school libraries, and those teachers have had their teaching certifications moved to be revoked in a retaliatory manner due to violating supposedly rules from the State Department. And so from my perspective, I think everybody should give out the red cards, of course, but I want to be extra cautious that everybody on this Zoom who's watching this is aware. We cannot tell you that the administration won't take retaliatory action for giving out red cards, especially with how volatile they've been about this specific issue.
Thank you, Colleen, for sharing that, because I think that's incredibly important. And regardless of what policies are within your district, we don't live in a place right now where things that we would think are acceptable or otherwise have been determined to be unacceptable necessarily apply.
I'm seeing two more questions to round it out. There's one on the open chat, and then Lorena, there was one that you'd already answered on the typed chat, but again, for recording purposes, I was hoping that you may be able to say that out loud. So we'll start first with a question by Karen, and this is for any panelist. What can the general populace do to show our immigrant community that they're welcomed, they're valued, and they're protected as best we can? We don't want our immigrant families to be traumatized by people and events that are beyond their control.
I'll answer this. And I say, Karen, well, the number one thing you're doing is obviously you care and you're showing up here. And so we need more of the general populace to do that, to speak up when they see these injustices or these things that are affecting our children in our community. The other thing is making sure to support public officials who are supporting our immigrant community and showing that they're welcomed and valued and protected. That's the number one. Our politicians, our leaders are the ones that are setting these policies that are causing this trauma and this fear and this, very sad point on our American history right now. So it's really important that, we support the officials who are advocating for our children and our immigrant community and not dividing them and placing blame and scapegoating them for the shortcomings of our country. So I would say that's the number one thing. Second, obviously speaking up if there is injustices happening and showing that you are a welcoming place. But thank you for being here present. Thank you for asking that question, and just supporting, and don't make it a them versus us thing. Many times when we've seen these protests or these movements, it's the community members. And yes, somebody that maybe looks like me, well, it's not going to convince as many people unless we see somebody like the other side as well supporting us. So thank you for that.
So let me just quickly add to what Lorena said about being appreciative of public officials. We thought it was important after Kevin Stitt put himself out there and took a public position against this proposed administrative rule. And there were a lot of folks who were spent, first reaction was, well, why is he doing this? What's the angle? Who got to him? And, we thought it was important to not worry about motives, not worry about, what his interest may be, but just to come out and say thank you. To let him know that there were organizations and individuals who supported the position and he had done the right and politically courageous thing to do. So when you hear elected officials who are sending the right message, saying the right thing, doing the right thing on immigration issues in particular, be sure to thank them. And if they're not, then encourage them to do so.
Would anybody else like to take a stab at it? All right. So Lorena, this is one that you did type in the chat. It's from Erica. The question is, how or what can we do to help our families, not just with the fear, but families that are going through a member being detained? I'm a teacher and we've had families impacted, and I just want to know how we can help.
Well, this is often happens, this question where they maybe have a family member detained. And as a teacher, your number one job is making sure and protecting that child. And unfortunately, you can't protect them from this trauma, emotional trauma necessarily, but by supporting them and making sure that they are in a safe place, that's the number one. The second thing is if they have a family member detained, that doesn't mean automatically that they will be deported. They have the opportunity to ask for an immigration bond and even fight their case before an immigration judge to fight for immigration relief and the ability to stay here and gain lawful status. So while this might not be within your ability, but for the family, it's really important that they know that they have this right and not give up hope immediately, and that they should seek legal help, speak to an immigration attorney, and then that they need to be prepared financially to pay for this immigration bond. And while there are numerous nonprofits in the state of Oklahoma who do this amazing work and they represent individuals pro bono, at the same time, they just can't keep up with demand or work as fast as they need to in handling a case where there is a removal proceeding, somebody detained. So they will need to seek legal assistance from an immigration attorney. Providing them information, this, know your rights are wonderful, these cards, if you are sharing them, but it's also advising these family members, hey, don't wait until somebody's detained or arrested to seek immigration help. Despite the executive orders from President Trump and these new directives to ICE and to the Department of Homeland Security, there are still laws to gain lawful status here in the United States. They were created by Congress. No president can immediately knock them down. So there are still methods and manners that people can gain lawful status and protection here in the United States, and they need to seek this now instead of later when it's an emergency or it's maybe a little bit too late. So advising them, of course, you probably don't know the status of these individuals, but hey, don't only just worry about the person who's being detained, but this is an opportunity as well to go seek if the other family members can get protection. But providing that emotional support for the children who are already, grow up with this emotional baggage of maybe not fully belonging here, but not fully belonging in their home country or the home country of their parents. So just making them feel welcomed and appreciated and protected. That's the number one concern that teachers can do. I felt it growing up, and it impacted me in positive manners. So I have no doubt the impact teachers can have is immense.
Thank you. And we're going to round it up. And before I head into our conclusion, we love that one of the questions was, are there any resources? So part of my conclusion, I wanted to reiterate, Lorena, again, what you put in the chat, you've been actively answering while we've been chit-chatting about resources or assistance for immigrant families in Tulsa or Oklahoma City. I think it would make sense to provide the list that you wrote in the chat to our follow-up email, but I'm still just going to read them out loud. So Lorena said nonprofits in Oklahoma City and Tulsa area are the Catholic Charities, Legal Clinic at the University of Tulsa, the YWCA in Tulsa, the American Dream Center in Tulsa, Latitude in Oklahoma City, and the Hispanic American Foundation in Oklahoma City. So thank you for providing resources. And again, I'll make sure to add that to our follow-up email. As a reminder, this has been recorded, so it will be available on our website at oklahomaappleseed.org. I'm also going to add a recording to it to an email to send to the participants that were here today, and I hope that you'll send it out to others. We've talked a lot about awareness and trying to prevent fear, and we hope that we can extend beyond the participants that were here today. If we didn't answer your question tonight, it doesn't mean that there's no opportunity to answer questions. So if you do still have something that's on your heart or mind, you're welcome to, again, go to our website or email us at info@okappleseed.org, and we'll make sure that it gets to either one of our Appleseed people or to our panelists here today. We host town halls, listening sessions, community forums, action socials as much as we can to engage with our community. And you may be able to reach out to either myself or our director of community organizing at that same email. We'll keep it simple, info@okappleseed.org. But I'm going to shamelessly plug in here a current initiative that our Education Justice Coalition is working on. It's 6 listening sessions over the next 4 months aimed directly at a book public survey that we got a good amount of responses for. It's called Better Outcomes for Oklahoma Kids. That's what book is. And we're holding our first session next Tuesday. That's March 4th, and it's going to be at the Downtown Central Library. You can find more information about that at our coalition website. That's advancedokkids.org. It's also linked onto the Appleseed website, so you can filter it through there. And just closing off, thank you for being a part of the conversation and putting our mission statement simply: fighting for the rights of all Oklahomans. We hope to see and hear from you soon. And the biggest thank you to our panelists.